If you think your high school gym class was brutal, wait until you hear what Spartan warriors had to endure just to earn the right to stand in formation. The Agoge, Sparta's legendary training program, wasn't just tough. It was specifically designed to break you down physically and mentally. And if you couldn't handle it, well, that was kind of the point. Let's dive into the disturbing reality of what it actually took to survive Spartan training and eventually face the chaos of ancient battlefield combat. Number 1, the selection process started at birth. Before a Spartan boy could even think about training, he had to pass his first test, and this one happened when he was just a newborn. Spartan elders would inspect every infant born in the city, looking for any signs of weakness, deformity, or illness. If the baby didn't meet their standards, and we're talking about old men examining a newborn for muscle tone and bone structure, the infant would be taken to a place called the Apothetae, a chasm on Mount Aegatus, and left there to die. Yeah, you read that right. Spartans practiced infanticide as official state policy. They believed that raising a weak child would waste resources and weaken their military, so they just eliminated anyone who didn't look like future warrior material. Modern archaeologists have actually found remains at the site, confirming this wasn't just propaganda from Sparta's enemies. The crazy part is that this was considered completely normal in Spartan society. Mothers were expected to hand over their babies for inspection without protest, and if the child was rejected, they weren't allowed to mourn publicly. That's your first lesson in Spartan life. Sentiment was weakness, and weakness got you killed. Number 2, the Agoge began at age 7 with immediate brutality. If you survived infancy, congratulations, but your real nightmare was just beginning. At 7 years old, Spartan boys were ripped away from their families and thrown into the Agoge, a state-run training program that would consume the next 13 years of their lives. From day 1, the instructors, called paidonomos, made it clear that childhood was over. The boys were organized into groups called aguli, or herds, because Spartans literally treated their children like animals that needed to be tamed and trained. They were given one cloak to wear year-round, no shoes, and barely enough food to survive. The insufficient food wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. The boys were expected to steal food to supplement their rations, teaching them cunning and survival skills. But here's the twisted part. If you got caught stealing, you weren't punished for stealing. You were brutally whipped for being stupid enough to get caught. One famous story tells of a Spartan boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When he was questioned, the fox started clawing and biting his stomach, but the boy stood there silently, letting the animal tear into his flesh rather than admit to the theft. He died from his injuries, and the Spartans praised him as an example of proper discipline. That's the mentality they were building. Pain and death were preferable to shame. Number 3, the Crypteia turned teenagers into sanctioned murderers. When Spartan trainees reached their late teens, the most promising warriors were selected for the Crypteia, which was essentially a secret police force made up of teenagers. But this wasn't about maintaining order in Sparta. The Crypteia had one primary mission, terrorizing and killing helots, the slave population that Sparta relied on for agriculture and labor. Here's how it worked. The selected young Spartans would be sent out into the countryside with nothing but a knife and orders to survive while hunting helots. They'd hide during the day and come out at night, targeting the strongest and most capable helots they could find. The goal was twofold. First, it gave the trainees real combat experience against living targets. Second, it kept the helot population terrified and submissive through random acts of violence. The Spartans would kill helots who showed too much strength, intelligence, or leadership potential. Basically anyone who might organize a rebellion. These weren't criminals being executed. These were innocent people, often farmers working their fields, who were murdered by teenagers as a training exercise. The Crypteia would sometimes kill dozens of helots in a single night, leaving their bodies as warnings. This program taught young Spartans that human life, at least non-Spartan life, was worthless, and that killing should be done without hesitation or remorse. By the time these guys graduated to full warrior status, they'd already committed multiple murders and had been conditioned to see it as normal. Number 4, the public whipping contests were entertainment and endurance tests. One of the most disturbing Spartan practices was the diamastagosis, a ritual held at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Teenage boys would be whipped brutally in front of an audience. And the goal was simple. Don't scream, don't beg for mercy, and definitely don't pass out. The boy who endured the longest without showing pain was declared the winner and earned great honor. But this wasn't just a few lashes with a belt. We're talking about sustained, violent whipping that could last for hours, with multiple boys being beaten simultaneously. The whips were designed to tear flesh, and boys regularly died during the contest. In fact, dying during the diamastigosis was considered honorable, proof that you had the pain tolerance worthy of a Spartan warrior. The Romans, who weren't exactly known for being squeamish, were horrified when they witnessed this ritual centuries later. They built a theater around the whipping area so spectators could watch more comfortably, turning it into a tourist attraction. Archaeological evidence shows that some boys were whipped so severely that the trauma is still visible on their skeletal remains found near the altar. The Spartans believed this ritual taught crucial lessons about enduring pain in battle, but really it was just institutionalized torture of children dressed up as religious ceremony. Number 5, battlefield reality was worse than any training. After surviving 13 years of the agoge, you'd think the actual battlefield would be a relief. But Spartan combat was its own special kind of hell. The phalanx formation that Spartans were famous for required warriors to stand shoulder to shoulder, shields locked together, advancing slowly into enemy lines. Sounds organized and controlled, right? Wrong. The reality was absolute chaos. In the phalanx, you couldn't see much beyond the guy directly in front of you. The bronze helmet limited your vision and hearing. You were packed so tightly that you could barely move your arms. The weight of the men behind you pushed you forward, whether you wanted to go or not. And the smell? Ancient accounts describe the overwhelming stench of sweat, blood, urine, and feces because, yes, men lost control of their bodily functions in the terror of close combat. When the two phalanxes collided, it became a shoving match with lethal weapons. Spears would thrust through gaps in shields, stabbing blindly at whatever flesh they found. Men would trip over bodies and be trampled by their own comrades. If you fell, you were dead. The phalanx would walk right over you. And if the enemy didn't kill you, your own side would crush you under their feet. Spartans were trained to never break formation no matter what. Even if the guy next to you took a spear through the throat and his blood sprayed across your face. You kept pushing forward. The psychological toll was immense. You weren't just fighting the enemy. You were fighting your own panic, your own survival instinct screaming at you to run. But running meant dishonor worse than death. Spartans who retreated or showed cowardice were stripped of citizenship and forced to wear distinctive clothing marking them as cowards. They couldn't marry, hold office, or participate in public life. They were social ghosts, shamed until death. Number 6, the wounded were often left to die. Here's something the movies never show you. Ancient battlefields had no medics, no evacuation procedures, no morphine. If you were wounded during combat, your fate depended entirely on whether your injury let you walk. Spartans had a brutal philosophy about battlefield injuries. If you could stand and fight, you stayed in formation. If you couldn't, you were left where you fell. The phalanx couldn't stop to help individuals. The formation's strength came from its cohesion, and breaking ranks to help a wounded comrade would create gaps the enemy could exploit. So, wounded Spartans would lie on the battlefield, often still alive, while the fighting continued around them and over them after the battle ended. If Sparta won, maybe someone would come back for the wounded. But if Sparta lost or had to retreat, those wounded warriors were abandoned to die slowly or be finished off by the enemy. The most horrifying accounts describe wounded Spartans lying in the sun for hours or even days, dying of thirst, blood loss, or infection, surrounded by corpses and unable to move. Some would beg passing enemies to kill them quickly rather than let them suffer. And remember, these men had spent their entire lives training for this moment, sacrificing everything for Sparta, only to be left to die alone on some random battlefield because their usefulness had ended the moment they couldn't stand. This was the reality of Spartan warfare. Not the glorious, heroic death in battle that movies show you, but a brutal, terrifying, often meaningless end to a life spent in service to a state that viewed you as nothing more than a weapon to be used and discarded.